Hello and welcome to the Class Evolution series. Today we're going to be covering the Fighter. Now, in 2nd edition, the Fighter was the only class that could specialize in a weapon. This meant that from the start, the Warrior was innately more powerful, really, than the other classes, because it was the only one that could attack, twice in a round with the same weapon without penalty. Like the Ranger could dual wield, but it really wasn't the same. The Fighter could specialize. He would up his attack, and he would up his number of attacks per round, and the damage of his weapon. So all of these things really went into making the Fighter a very, very powerful early game class. Now, this would ultimately level out in the end. They could level earlier than the other ones, and this would eventually become underpowered. But early in the game, they were ridiculously powerful. They could wear every armor. They had little to no restriction on weapons. They had the most weapon proficiencies. They specialized. I mean, innately, warriors were great from the start, and they were the only class, aside from the Ranger, that could get 2 attacks ever in a round, as far as I'm aware. Paladin couldn't specialize, nor could he really dual wield without penalties, and the Ranger could, but one weapon and then one less damage. So that's how that one worked. And the Fighter could also later on get more attacks. So with the Ranger still doing 2, the Warrior I think can do 3 in the end. So this makes the Fighter a very powerful class. Now, the Complete Fighter's Handbook, really, really well done. Very good kits in it. New proficiencies are kind of alright, but really, really good. I mean, it's a very well done book. And when the Fighter transferred over into 3.5, and I believe it's the same for Pathfinder, so I'm going to lump 3.5, 3rd edition, and Pathfinder all in one. The Fighter became less special. The Fighter had the best base attack bonus modifier. Progression, but I think there was a couple other classes that had the same. They could wear armor, but so could everyone else. So the Fighter was really at a loss for what they could do special that no one else could. So then came along the weapon specialization. Now the weapon specialization in 3.5 Pathfinder all that is different than in 2nd edition. It was very, I get a small bonus to attack, but it wasn't nearly as grand as the 2nd edition specialization, but it was still something. So the Fighter was still at a loss. So what they did was they gave them feats, a ridiculous number of feats. They got a bonus feat every other level. So at first they got one, then I believe it was 2nd, 4th, 6th, and then every even numbered level after that. And they still also gained the ones on every 3rd level. So at 1st level, if you're anything other than a human and a fighter, and if you're a fighter and then anything other than human, you got 2 feats to start with. If you're human, you start with 3 feats. That's pretty good. I mean, that's up a really good skill tree. That's power attack, cleave, and say something else awesome. So, they were getting some good stuff. And then the support for their books came out. Now, I'm not a fan of the prestige class system in the D20 system. I think the prestige class have way too many prerequisites, which ultimately end up kind of killing your ability to use them unless you plan from level 1, where you're going to be at level 6, 7, or 8, or wherever you can qualify for it. So that really killed it, but there were some cool ones. But ultimately, the Fighter strong suit came in their feats. and there was tons and tons of feats released for them, and some of them really, really cool. Like I believe it was called Comet Charge, which is really, really specialized. You know, you ready in action to charge if the enemy looks like they're going to charge, and you collide in the middle, and you do some cool weapon damage, and you stop their charge, and I think you knock them prone too. I mean, it's really, really cool. But these feats, you know, that's all they had. And a lot of these feats anyone else could pick. So once again, you're not really the only benefit you really gained was a little bit of an extra attack power every now and then when you got weapon specialization, and you know, easily 3 times the number of feats of any other class. And that carried through into Pathfinder and 3.5 and 3rd edition. It was all really the same fighter. So, in my personal opinion, your combat usually ended up fairly bland if you're a fighter. You're like, roll my dice, I hit, shock for shocks, roll my damage, whoop-de-fucking-do. Your combat was really bland. I mean, every now and then you get a feat to do something, but you know, all the combat maneuver rolls were ridiculous. They cleaned it up a little bit in Pathfinder, but I mean, you're still just swing, damage, swing, damage, swing, damage. Your option came from your weapon choice. Now, given some players can really play a fighter really well, you know, they do a lot of cool things. Like, I saw one guy, he played a fighter, and he got, like, handle animal as a skill so they could have a wolf, and it was really cool. It was unique. But for the most part, the fighter is swing, damage, swing, damage. Which brings me into 4th edition, which in my personal opinion did a ton to help the fighter. With the entire ability system, I'm going to refrain from calling it power, because then it was like, oh my god, spells, which is not what they are. They're just essentially combat maneuvers. And it really, really helped. Now, they did take away things that were kind of stupid. They took away plate mail from them at the beginning, which bothers me. I mean, in a realistic sense, you know, fighters of old, they didn't run around in full plate all the time. It was mostly, you know, chainish armor, stuff like that, half plates. I mean, it was the knights that wore the full plate armor. But I think that the fighter should have been given it innately. They eventually got it with the Essentials line, when they split the fighter down 2 pads. Well, really 3, because there was the core class and then the 2 that Essentials released. So it went back to that old 2nd edition way where it was the warrior heading and then ranger, paladin, fighter. It's now fighter as a heading, and then it's like weapon master is the original, Slayer, which is this 2-handed behemoth killing machine, and Knight, which is this awesome battlefield controller. And the fighter in 4th edition got a lot, because they got powers, these abilities, these combat maneuvers, which really stopped the monotony of roll damage. You actually had to pick. And some of these abilities would allow them to shift the battlefield around, you know, slide. They could, like, push their target and knock them prone and then slide up on them. I mean, there was a lot of really cool maneuvers, which a lot of people really didn't like, because they thought that the fighter now had become too complicated, which I think is bullshit. It is not complicated. If you want to play if you do not want to play a complicated game, go play World of Warcraft, where everything's laid out for you. No, I hated the early fighter, how it was just, you did nothing. You had no option past your weapon choice, and every now and then your feat choice, but ultimately early tree feats kind of sucked. Yeah, there were some awesome feats every now and then, but... So I think that the 4th edition did a lot for them. And then they actually got 2 support books. They're the only 4th edition power source. Yes, because they broke them into power source. Don't be freaking out. That got 2 books released for them. So the fighter got a ton of options, a ton of Paragon pads, a ton of, you know, maneuver choices, a ton of starting ability choices, feats. I mean, it was a lot of stuff, which made the fighter really, really unique and fun to play. So ultimately, I think that the evolution of the fighter ended up very, very advantageous to the class, so that it's no longer the class that everyone's just kind of like, oh, look, fighter, swinging damage. So remember, leave a comment down below for what you want for the next one. Otherwise, I'll have to pick that one too. So until next time, have a good one.